Hello! Today I'm going to review one of my all-time favorites, XCOM UFO Defense, or because I'm in Europe, the way I've always known it, UFO Enemy Unknown. This turn-based tactical game was published by Microprose, that was massive back then, and developed by Mythos Games. The game designer was Mr. Julian Gollop, a legend in game industry. He's been around since the start. So it's no wonder that the first XCOM game that became a massive success around 1994 didn't come out of nowhere. It has a pretty nice evolution history. So the initial game, where all the basic game mechanics were established, was called Rebel Star, and it came out in 1984 on ZX Spectrum. The initial game was called Rebel Star Raiders and didn't include a single-player option. And moreover, it was written in BASIC. Well, it's like washing your car with a toothbrush. The next step in evolution was called simply Rebel Star, and it included a computer-controlled enemy. Well, if you have ever tried to code something like this in an 8-bit computer, that's not a small feat. This 1986 game had a sequel called Rebel Star 2 in 1988. Besides providing a new interface and an ample of gameplay inventions, it spawned a game called Lizard Squad. This tactical game is placed in the very same game world, and behind the surface of its 8-bit graphics, you can find pretty similar game mechanics to XCOM. Actually, XCOM started as Lizard Squad 2. Even some soldiers have similar names. So, Rebel Star, Lizard Squad, and XCOM, they are in the very same universe. The biggest difference between XCOM and all of its predecessors is that XCOM includes a long-term strategy layer. So in this game you have base management, research, manufacturing, buying and selling stuff, education of personnel, defense, and preparation for long-term operations. So when it comes to tactics, XCOM has quite a depth. And as a result of its inherited great game mechanics, it can produce quite harsh and hard tactical situations to solve. So yep, it's a hard game, but if you are up to the challenge, well, it will give you a lot. Literally, I've been playing it since 1997, I guess. Instead of talking about the obvious, after starting the game, you can see all the things anyway. In the intro, you can see the background story, not a very complicated one. The menu system, the screen layout, well, you have seen something like that if you have ever started a PC game. So instead of explaining how to breathe, I would prefer telling you some practical tricks and tips. So before all of that, most probably you will play this game on a modern system. You will need an old PC emulator called DOSbox, Das Gehäuse in German. If you happen to use the Steam version of this game, then it will automatically install DOSbox in the game folder. It's important because you may have to adjust or modify the config file of DOSbox, to get it full screen and things like that. So I admit I don't know shit about DOSbox really, but I will show you my config file that runs UFO and, well, all my DOS games on a full HD monitor. The simplest way for me to edit this file was like using Windows Commander and then just hit F3 on the file list, and it will enable you to edit this file. So these are my DOSbox settings that may be different for your system. It's quite simple. On the top you can find the switches and the flags and all the syntax for the settings. Everything is described there. And around the middle, there are the actual settings that you have to modify what you need. In my case, it was a trial and error. I just adjusted these things until it started to display properly. So, tips for the actual gameplay. Number 1. The stats of your soldiers are much more important than they seem to be. If you want to use your soldiers the most efficient way, then just use their best abilities. For example, someone with a good accuracy and reactions will make a great sniper, or a guy with a high strength value and stamina will make a good heavy soldier. A recon unit needs high stamina and reactions. Psionic soldiers are somewhat different and obvious that they will need high stats of the field. Tip number 2. Stats will grow only after kills. It is very simple. Execute aliens only with the soldiers that you want to improve. Tip number 3. Execute aliens only with human units. Again, a simple thing, they improve. But robotic units like hovercrafts don't. To win this game you need skilled soldiers. That's it. Tip number 4. I call this one XCOM Academy. In the game, there's a point when I establish a base with rookies only and a couple of experienced soldiers. Of course, with a number of psionic research facilities. So then I send these guys to easier missions, scanning for new talents. If something goes wrong, then the veteran soldiers just stop him and save the day. Tip number 5. After having a bunch of soldiers who can mind control aliens, then I use a fairly simple tactics: recon and mind control. If possible, I disarm the enemy unit. With 2 or 3 aliens you can discover the whole playfield without risking your soldiers to be killed. I don't capture aliens who are not necessary for research. Remember, statistics grow only after kills. So I execute aliens only with soldiers whom I want to develop. Tip number 6. Use subsquads. Instead of everyone going just like an individual Rambo, running his lonely mission, keep the guys in pairs or triplets, keeping an optimal distance between each other, especially during the early game when you have no psionic soldiers. When something goes wrong, usually they can save each other. Tip number 7. A good sniper with higher accuracy stats can fire through all the map. If someone discovered the enemy unit and it's in line of sight of the sniper, then just bam, and it's gone. Tip number 8. With your psionic soldier, use mind control only and don't waste time on panicking the enemy. Okay, mind controlling is actually more difficult, but panicking will make the enemy soldier just do stupid things out of fear, just like shooting a rocket launcher to a random direction. Well, if that random direction is where your soldier is, that's not a good thing. Tip number 9. Capture and interrogate VIP aliens only, just like commanders, navigators, and guys like that. They have vital information about your future missions or research. Simple soldiers are useful only during the first encounter to research the actual race. I repeat, the statistics of your soldiers grow only after kills, so spare only VIPs. Tip number 10. Build and store essential things only. So literally you can complete the game with 10 flying armor, 10 heavy plasmas, 2 rocket launchers and 4 psionic amps. If you give the actual gear to the soldier who is actually going on mission, and you don't try to equip everyone at every base, then after having these high-impact weapons, 10 or 15 of them, you will need ammunition only. Tip number 11. You can make it into an industry. If you don't want to run into financial problems, then you just should mass-produce things that you can sell. My favorites are laser weapons. They don't need special materials and they produce quite quickly. They sell well, so even after a lot of countries abandoning the XCOM project, you still will be able to create a profit. Tip number 12. Sell everything that you don't need. Alien corpses, excess weapons, items that you just don't use, tactically useless weapons, materials. Don't store anything unnecessary. Tip number 13. With 100 scientists, 50 engineers, and 20 soldiers, you can win the game, even on superhuman level. if you have just one HQ where your combat units are, and the rest of the bases are fighter jets, base defenses, radars, things to detect and shut down UFOs, then one single ground squad can do the job. Okay, the final tip. Use your game saves wisely. As XCOM is a turn-based strategy game, then it is maybe a good idea to save at the beginning of every turn and around the end of every turn. I usually have one save outside the missions, and that's it. If you don't want to risk a failure, then you just save at the beginning of the mission. In case of catastrophe, you can just start over from the beginning. So that's all about it. The 1994 XCOM game is a classic, one of the best of its kind. Its complexity, the balance, and the layers of tactics made it quite unique back in time. Its sequel, XCOM 2, is a similar but much harder game. The third classic game, called XCOM Apocalypse, is a completely unique strategy game. I think it's one of its kind, even since, and it's pretty awesome in very short. But that's another tale for another day. See you somewhere in time.